like to say welcome to everybody again. Thank you all so much for joining in, and good evening. Welcome to Cardross Climate Action Network's third Zoom. This one is really exciting as it's an introduction into our project on our very own beach that we can all get involved in and learn about and get excited about possibly being able to make a difference to an amazing habitat, the intertidal area of our beach. However, before I go on to introduce our brilliant speaker, Duncan, this evening, I'd like to set the scene a little. The biodiversity, that is the variety of all the things that live in our oceans, seas, beaches and rivers, are getting a lot of press recently and not always for good reasons. A couple of years ago, the BBC series Blue Planet really captured the public's awareness of the damage that plastics are doing to our waterways, big and small. Worldwide overfishing is a problem, and while some fisheries are managed well, there's still a lot to do to stop an unsustainable amount of fish being removed from our oceans. Biodiversity in the water is in trouble and has been for some time. We, for example, no longer have herring fisheries in Argyll, and wild Scottish salmon has all but stopped. I felt this came home to me a bit the other day. I stopped in at the Loch Fyne Oyster Bar at the deli to ask a couple of questions. All their fresh fish comes from the Glasgow fish market. I found this a bit sad because as a sailor who was well aware of the history of the Loch Fyne skiffs, skillfully made, beautiful wee boats that 100 years ago would have been line and pot fishing in Loch Fyne, it made me realise that at that time, these vessels would have been supplying Glasgow and more inland areas, not the other way round. I'm not going to go into salmon and trout farming, scallop dredging and human land activity that causes soil erosion and excess nutrients to run into our rivers, as that's discussion for another time. But I thought it was important to set the scene that there is a problem with our local waters and it is man-made. I'm a firm believer that there's no point in getting sad and down about challenges that habitats face, because research and projects show that we can change situations if we try. In this case, we have our own wee bay, so we're really lucky to have the space that we can help. Another stroke of luck is that it's already been designated as a special protection zone, which Duncan will talk about more. And the third stroke of luck is that if we can help it, we could hit multiple targets with one stone. If we can help our beach, we can help biodiversity, we can also do our bit to carbon capture, because seagrass and kelps store carbon in higher amounts than trees. This is a win-win situation. So there's a lot to be positive about and work to be done. Now, to introduce Duncan Smallman, our very own Cardross resident marine biologist. We also, by the way, have 2 biology lecturers and a high school biology teacher and some environmental consultants. We really are very lucky for the size of our village. Duncan did his honours degree at Bangor in North Wales and then went on to complete a PhD about the host parasite ecology of salmon lice in Aberdeen. He lived on Seal Island and gained experience of working on boats and has done work as a wildlife tour guide on oyster and mussels farms, on tank cultivation of seaweed, and in 2016 started his own company running seashore foraging and seaweed related activities, and now is mainly helping people to set up seaweed wild harvesting and farming, which includes seashore surveys. He is a man who knows a lot about seaweed, but what we love is his total enthusiasm for all things on the beach, which makes him a very interesting person to go for a walk with. So with that, I will hand over to Duncan. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, hang on. Can you hear me okay? Brilliant. Right, I'm going to share my screen. I thought I had a video ready as well. Maybe I didn't. Did I turn that off? Oh well, no video for everyone. Okay. Maybe if I can find it quickly, I will do.
I can talk for a couple of minutes if that helps, Duncan. That's one of my specialist topics.
It's okay. It's okay.
You're all good?
I think so. Hang on. unless you can see my,
we
there
can
we
see
go.
your screen now.
There we go. Right. No, that's not what I wanted. Where's my video? Oh, well, this is going really smoothly.
That's
right,
okay.
We'll shut that. Right. I have got a new laptop, so I have not.
Oh, my husband got given a new laptop from his work, and it sat in the corner for about a week because he was too upset about opening it and having to plug it in. Not a good thing.
Oh no, this has been the toy of the moment. Okay, so that is a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. It's a great honour to be able to talk with you, all of you, this evening. I would say I didn't give wildlife tour guides around oyster and mussel farms. It's just one of the various jobs whilst I was living actually on the Easdale Island, not Seal Island, that I did.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's just, you know, Easdale Island, they get a bit touchy about these things, and I can't help that.
My grandparents lived in Seal.
See, it's another connection. Everyone's connected to Seal or Easdale. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful seashore there, but we've got one as well. So just going to touch quickly as a starter on. Can everyone see the slides? Okay, yeah. I haven't actually done screen sharing that often, so any thumbs up about the slides would be great.
Yeah, you're good.
Excellent. So just quickly on the biodiversity, because that's what kind of focusing on. Biodiversity is also a way of looking at food webs and like the interactions within an ecosystem, but mainly focused on where the energy goes. And that usually starts with the sun going into the plants, or sometimes other things like methanogenic bacteria or something like that. These primary producers that take energy from one place, and they use that energy, and then other stuff feeds on that. So you can also look at biodiversity on even how much carbon is locked within living organisms. And this was a great fact, was that the biosphere, which is all living things, is estimated to hold 4 trillion tons of carbon, which is it's just immense. It's mind-boggling numbers. What we like to see often is a higher biodiversity, because that just means often there's a more complex food web. It means it's just looks like a healthier ecosystem. It just means more species, more creatures, organisms. I shouldn't say creatures, because it's not just those. Can survive. And there's also another way it looks at it is there's lots of energy in that system. There's a lot going on, and you can look at it in terms of that there's a lot of carbon that isn't locked away in the atmosphere. In fact, you can also look at it in ways that there's a lot of water locked away and not in the atmosphere. So if you're looking at in terms of climate change, that is high biodiversity is a very good thing. And also, you know, we get a lot of enjoyment if there's a lot of things around, you know, going out looking at insects or flowers. You can always see like a forest or something that has high biodiversity. Usually there's a lot going on, and it often makes us feel happy. And for me, it's when there's a lot going on the beach that I'm really happy. I'm happier on the seashore than I am usually in the forest. And some of these species are what we call bioindicators. We like to use these particular species as a way of indicating how healthy a ecosystem or a habitat is. And when talking about food webs, I include us. Like, we are part of that food web. Our production of food, or if we go fishing, is part of that food web. So we need high biodiversity to support just us. So there is always that. We are animals as well, and we've got to keep that in consideration. So Cardross Bay. Woo! Look at this field of green. Wonderful stuff. I will say most of the photos in tonight's presentation are from Cardross. I will say when they're not. There are some that aren't. But yeah, so this is our seashore, and I'm going to talk about why we should survey it. And this is what I call Cardross with its field of green, because at the moment there's a lot of green seaweed around. So what's so special about Cardross Bay? Well, it is in the upper ends of the Firth of Clyde, end of the Clyde estuary. It's an estuarine environment. Means there's a mixture of salt water and fresh water. It's kind of a muddy, if you go down, it's a muddy kind of place. It's got some stones, a bit of sand, a bit of gravel, and there's scattering boulders around. It's actually had quite a lot of various uses, it seems. It seems there might have been old fish traps in the area. You see sometimes wooden stakes up towards the railway station. I think those are actually old fish traps. And yeah, you can see on the OS map here that I think these are actually marked out older fish traps. Now, I haven't lived in Cardross for that long, so I don't 100% know if Ferry Road here actually did lead to an old ferry. But there are boulders here, and the whole place has a few boulders. So it's kind of like a squishy environment with a few hard substrates. Now, as well as the old uses, current uses, people obviously there's a sawmill just on top of the shore. People like to obviously go walking around it. It's a frequent place for people to go fishing. We get some bird watchers, more about that. Because it's a nice big flat expanse, people like to ride their horses there, and people like to let their dogs go running around. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but at certain times of year it is, because it is a special protected area and it is part of the Inner Clyde Nature Reserve. Oh, there was a ferry terminal. Perfect. Thank you. I take it was a rowboat. Excellent. I just lost my train of thought there. So yeah, it's a protected area because of some of the waders. So between, I think, October and April, you're not meant to let your dogs off, and you're meant to be aware that there are 3 species of bird that come and overwinter and feed here. They are, come on, yeah, redshank, curlew, and the squeaky toy that is the oyster catcher. These are all birds are actually protected species under the EU Habitats Directive, but these are this area is designated as a protected area and a feeding ground, and so that you're not meant to disturb. But I don't think everyone realizes that the signs are pretty small. However, Cardross Bay is much more than that. Cardross Bay has so many birds, and I don't know if everyone's noticed them, but these are the ones that I found. I'm going to ignore the species of gull we get. We do probably get about a few species. We've got common gull, I've seen common gulls, herring gulls, black-headed gulls, lesser blackback, and even greater blackback gulls. But we also get, right, why didn't that work? Yay, goosanders, mergansers, widgeons, shell ducks, knots, eider ducks, goldeneye, lapwings, cormorants and shags. On the river, we also get dippers, and at this time of year, we get common terns actually diving in and feeding. And they can, when the tide is in, they are really not diving not that far offshore, and you can hear them. They've got a very distinctive squawk. One of the jobs I've done is tracking sandwich terns, and you get used to hearing terns. In fact, I still dream of them, and they sometimes haunt my sleep. Oh, I would say that actually above me, oh, you can see me probably. There is a picture of a diving common tern. I do quite like them. They are beautiful birds. Okay, so we've got quite a large diversity of seabirds. Here's my attempt. These dots here, this is how difficult it is with a phone to try and take a photo of some common terns. These are terns, again, in Cardross. So there's a great diversity of birds that feed here, and it's an important feeding ground for these species. And that kind of indicates that there is a lot happening on the seashore to be able to support all these, well, technically predators. I know some of the ducks and some of the swans are grazers, but there's a lot happening here. So to understand our seashore, what's happening in Cardross Bay, kind of need to introduce what a seashore is. So I'm going to be assuming that everyone is quite comfortable with the idea of tides and maybe what neap and spring tides are. If you're not, we can come back to it at the end. But pretty well, a neap tide is when there's not a lot of water movement. The difference between high and low water is small, and a spring tide is when it's the tide goes all the way out, and you can walk near. It looks like you can almost walk to Port Glasgow. So, and that's usually around a new moon or a full moon. So, the seashore is where the sea, the tide, meets the land. The bit between the high and low water zone, the high and low water is the intertidal or littoral zone. Now, humans, to understand the world, we put everything in boxes, and we've done exactly the same with the seashore. So above high tide is called the supralittoral. It's the bit immediately that is influenced by the waves and the winds. Like sand dune systems are actually considered part of the supralittoral. The plants and the animals living there are very much adapted still to the more salty, saline conditions. Then we get to the high tide, and here I mean high water springs. And then below the high tide is the upper shore. Then we go mid-shore, low tide, and below mean low water springs is known as the sublittoral, and then it goes into the underwater bit. And it's really key to take it here that pretty well everything below high tide and within the upper shore and below that is a marine environment. It's the marine organisms that can survive out of air. It is not terrestrial animals or plants that are surviving underwater. There are a few exceptions in the plants, but generally it is all marine. That to me makes it a marine extreme environment. It's just amazing that something can survive out of its preferred environment for, say, up to 6 hours. Now, which species are present tell us a lot about what the conditions our seashore experiences. And the factors that influence what we find on the seashore and what we like to call the type of seashore. Yeah, seashores are categorized by like whether they're exposed or highly sheltered. And this is often given away by actually the biodiversity we get there is the tidal range. So that difference in height between high and low water, the exposure to waves, wind and water movement. Some species and some seaweeds really like quite exposed, big waves. They like it rough, whereas other species prefer quite sheltered, low exposure to waves. Some species don't really like a lot of water movement, and that can be a tidal influence. You can get a lot of tidal currents, or we got influence from rivers, say. So you can also get tidal streams and freshwater influence. I haven't included salinity here. Salinity, or how salty the water is really key as well. Some species can tolerate lower salinity, and some species really don't like it at all. We're also looking at what the substrate is doing, whether it's a hard rock or if it's kind of a soft sediment or kind of a loose substrate. So whether we're looking at mud, silt, gravel, pebbles, or boulders, and the topography, whether it's a cliff, a very steep slope, or something what we've got in Cardross Bay, which is a beautiful, gentle slope. And human activity. The human impact on a seashore can be just as great. So we're not just looking at, say, historic or current industrial uses of the waterways, which can have, and the pollution from industry, but we are generally talking about human pollution, and especially urbanization. If you've got a lot of areas where rainwater isn't being absorbed into the ground, it's just running off into gutters. That's a lot of excess fresh water going in, which affects the salinity. Often then it also leads to dirt and excess soil and excess sediment getting washed out into the sea in the coastal areas. Farming can influence that as well. So you can sometimes get excess nutrients, storm drains, sewage, you get the picture. There's a lot of that can really impact a seashore. And of course, this also brings litter, and we touch on plastic pollution, but often that is either blown in into the water or it gets washed in. So all of these influence what is happening with the biodiversity. So what about Cardross? Well, it's a moderately sheltered to sheltered seashore. It's got lots of mud, which indicates that A is probably partly the river, but it's not going to experience a lot of wave action. And the species we actually find here are very much more associated with more sheltered conditions. Yes, there's probably a bit more wave action and actually water movements. Certainly there's a bit of a tidal flow more towards the, well, probably more to do with the river, but there's much more of a flow when you get down towards the lower water. But yeah, it's a lovely kind of sheltered conditions, and the species we find here tell us that. So most food webs start with photosynthesis. We're not going to touch on chemosynthesis. This is not a primary producers lecture, honest. So I'm going to sort of broadly go from high tide to into the water. So we're going to start with on land in the supralittoral. The coastal plants we might expect are something like this. This is actually a sea radish. You can eat it if you really want. It tastes like a radish. It's a vascular plant. Then towards the high tide mark, just above it, we'll sometimes get another photosynthesizer, which is lichen. Lichen is a funky three-way between of a symbiosis between a fungi cell, a yeast cell, and a algal cell. So it photosynthesizes, and it can also break down rock and get new minerals that way. It is amazing. Lichens are sometimes really key in soil creation, but in the intertidal, they show roughly where just above high water is. So just a reminder, vascular higher plant. Something else that photosynthesizes. Then we get to high tide area. Now this is sometimes where the plants, certainly the terrestrial plants, stop. This is the only one I've got of near the river. These are the grassy kind of marshy species. It's weird terrestrial stuff. I'm a marine person, come on. So please forgive me if I don't get my grass species right. But anyway, this is kind of marsh grass, and it will get covered, particularly on the high spring tides, but otherwise also the time it's not covered by water, and it likes that. It can survive being covered, but it's not preferred. Then we go to high tide mark, and just below, suddenly we're into the marine environment. This is still Cardross Bay. Look how clear that water is. It almost looks like an underwater forest, and that's what sometimes I like to consider the stuff growing on the seashore is like equivalent of a forest. These are maybe low trees, these are racks or bushes, because a lot of species of seaweed are perennial. They'll keep, and they can live for, well, the racks can live for maybe up to 20 years, but some of the kelps can live up for 30 years. So they're not very long lived, but you know, they do hang around for quite a while. Look, nice clean water. Now there is one plant that does live in the seashore, and it's a higher plant. It's a vascular plant, and it's a flowering plant, and we've got it in Cardross. I was so excited when I realized that I wasn't crazy. This, da-da, I bring you dwarf eelgrass. How exciting. We've got seagrass, people. It's really cool. We've got seagrass. Now, in Denmark, they figured that seagrass was an indicator of waters improving, because seagrass is a bit delicate. It doesn't like too many nutrients. It does need quite clear water as well. So that means where we are, the water quality is good enough for this quite delicate organism to live. Now this is still upper shore. It's still within, it's below, is below these species here. But the importance about seagrass is it's really effective at locking away carbon. is apparently 35 times more efficient at locking away carbon into the sediments than a rainforest. That is how awesome they are. They are such key nursery grounds, feeding grounds for so many animals and organisms. I did actually, before uni, did well, coral reef surveys, but we also surveyed the eelgrass there, and the fish that you would get there. You would get sea urchins, but some very big species, admittedly this is tropics, fed there, but the seagrass can be so important. This is a higher upper shore species, and this is dwarf eelgrass, but we've got seagrass. 90%, it is estimated 90% of the UK's seagrass has been lost. So the fact that we've got some means we are within something, we are quite a unique spot. But of course, the main photosynthesizers on a seashore are the seaweeds. Yep, hooray. Oh yes, sorry. Yes, there was, sorry, I forgot to include the egret. I just saw the comment. Hooray for seagrass indeed. But let's go on to seaweeds, because they're pretty amazing. Right, come on. Seaweed, it's really diverse. There are approximately 650 species around the UK. However, they are split up and broadly into 3 groups. We've got our brown seaweeds, excuse me, like up here, this is a rack, and here's some kelp, and here's egg rack, so this is a serrated rack. We've got our red seaweeds here, this is Irish moss. It's a bit bleached, but we've got some Irish moss here. This is a beautiful fern-like species of red. We've got some lava. We've got something called tubular weed. Admittedly, this lava here, this one here is actually taken at Helensburgh, and so is the kelp, because we actually have no kelp. We've got very limited kelp, but at low tide, I haven't found any around Cardross yet. And we've got our green species. As you can see, my trusty little helper, very much enjoying the green stuff at Ardmore, and here's some from Cardross. The key takeaway is that the green seaweeds are related to plants. They are within the plant kingdom. The red seaweeds are sort of related to plants. They're possibly within the plant kingdom. There is always discussions. Taxonomists like to try and define things very much more, and no one's very sure. And the brown seaweeds are in their own kingdom. What this means is pretty well, we are about as related to green seaweeds as we are to, green seaweeds are about as closely related to the brown seaweeds as we are related to the brown seaweeds. They are totally different. There is that much of a shared ancestry. So some of the brown seaweeds are more closely related to slime molds, and within the same kingdom is the group of organisms that calls the potato famine. That was something that related to brown seaweeds. So the key thing is we've got 3 very distinct groups of photosynthetic organisms living on our seashore, which to me is boom, so much better than a forest. Bye-bye forest, you're just rubbish. Seaweed is where it's at, seagrass is where it's at. We've got vascular plants, we've got other non-vascular plants, and we've got other crazy photosynthesizers. So yeah, I mean, they all photosynthesize. They are all different. They've got very different life cycles, and they all play a part as a home and as food for lots of organisms. I'm going to touch some of what's living on our seashore here. Now, as I said, Cardross has a lot of mud, silt, sand, and gravel, and so we've got lots of worms. Again, all from Cardross. You're probably familiar with these. These are lugworms, casts, very good at churning and turning over sediment, and in that way they also help lock away carbon. It's very much like our own worms. A healthy seashore usually has lots of worms. These are 2 types of ragworm. I think this is actually a leaf ragworm. Actually, tried to get a video here, but they pulse beautifully. They've got like this pulsing green wave to them, and this is a beast. This is like up to, what was it, 30 centimeters. Lindsay and I, Lindsay, I think, was it Nicola and I, and no, Lindsay Heather, Mary, Nicola and I were on the beach and we found this, and that is amazing. This is a king ragworm. It's a top-notch predator. Yeah, there are worms that go out munching. They've got scary jaws that shoot out on a proboscis, but they're very flimsy, but they're very cool. It was a very exciting day. It's very exciting seeing these, but my son seemed to be managed to massacre them, trying to pick them up. Worms, very good bird food. This is what a lot of the waders are going for. A lot of the waders will also be going for molluscs. These mainly are clams, our bivalves, and snails. So again, only one of the photos here is from Cardross. I am very sorry. This is from Helensburgh. This is a small, I would say it's like a surf clam. But these here from Kinloch up on Skye are native oysters. I don't have many good photos of snails, so I've got this one. This is a small yellow one that lives on Bladderwrack, which is what we've also got. And here we've got mussels. Cardross Bay had some extensive mussel beds. It is wonderful to see because mussel beds and actually native oyster beds create a bit more of a complicated environment. Don't worry about the worms underneath. The worms will be perfectly happy. They are always happy underneath a sediment. But when you have a more complicated structure, then you've got more places for other things to hide. You know, we talk about biodiversity in terms of food webs, but a lot of things don't really want to get eaten. And so if you've got places of hidey holes or somewhere that you can actually live on, then you create that diversity. So here's the mussels, which are and like oysters, are very effective at cleaning water. They take out lots of particles. We've got barnacles on the mussels, but we've also got some snails. I think that's actually just a type of winkle. And we've got some periwinkles. Probably wouldn't necessarily eat them, but it would be interesting to test them. The one thing that's really interesting is that I did find, I have found a native oyster shell. It's probably it was an old one. It wasn't in great condition, so I don't have a photo of it, and it felt very silly not taking one. So I think that probably were native oysters in the Clyde system. And there's a lot of focus on reintroducing native oysters, trying to get them out and about because they're long-lived species, longer than mussels. And what our molluscs are bivalves, especially because they're so long-lived, can be quite long-lived. They are really good at locking away carbon, and because they create such a complex system for as part of a food web, they are great habitats for fish, and hence why we've got a lot of people going down fishing. We've got these habitats that means that fish like to come here and feed, and then if there's fish feeding, that's why we get the herons feeding there, but we also get small fish like sand eels or sprats that must be coming up to allow something like a common tern to come and feed. Really exciting. But the other things that live in our seaweed are crustaceans. So this is from Easdale. It's the best photo I've ever got of a marine woodlouse. Here with its little face is an isopod, or a marine woodlouse. I love them to bits. I would keep them as pets. This is a green shore crab, which my son actually found. And here we've got crangon, which is a brown shrimp. And again, these are both scavengers. A lot of them will actually, isopods especially, actually will graze on seaweed. I should have said actually a lot of snails are the key grazers of seaweed. But these are all some of the animals that I would expect us to actually potentially find, and more. Crustaceans are really difficult to get a good photo of, and so I would hope that when we are doing our surveys, that we'd find more. And that's why we need to survey. So these are all good reasons to survey, to really understand what we can find in Cardross Bay. And then that way we are able to track the changes that is happening in Cardross Bay, and maybe, and as well as map the seagrass. For me, that is really key. Let's map that seagrass. Let's also see what's happening with that, because we kind of want to know what we might need to do to help protect and enhance this habitat. And, you know, e.g., I put native oyster reintroduction, and would also say the one thing that I find weird that is missing is any very extensive kelp beds. Could be the sediment, but I think it's a lack of hard substrate. And there's these things called reef cubes, which I think would be really good for. They create a complex structure. They create this housing that would allow different seaweed species. So in that way we increase carbon capture if you really want to do that. But it just creates a more complicated habitat. Here they've got some native oysters stuck to them, and it might be quite a nice way of helping reintroduce native oysters. But what's more, it is a great way to spend time outdoors and learn about our seashore. And Philin, the seaweed child of mine, loves obviously coming out and splashing in the water and finding crabs and worms. The other thing is we did actually get funding to do this, so we are doing it. Regardless, I get very excited about doing this, that we can do this. We can get the equipment, can do it so well, and then we can properly get lots of data to feed into various organizations, and just there's so much exciting possibilities. So with that, I'm probably well over 20 minutes. Thank you very much for watching and paying attention. Just want to say the first Seashore Sessions weekend, where we'll be out and down and out and starting surveys and just having a bit of a splash around, will be the 18th, 19th and 20th of June. Times to be confirmed. And there we go. I do actually have a video of a Mrs. Shrimp somewhere, but I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, Duncan. That was brilliant. Yep, so you heard it here first. This is the announcement of the dates of our first Seashore survey, 18th, 19th, 20th. There'll be a fun family sesh probably, and then anyone who's wanting to really learn about how to survey and what to look for will be able to tell you lots more about it nearer the time.